I'm impatient. And so, for those of you who don't know Mr. Don Hackett, he is also known as the Cork Tease. He is our favorite distributor in the world. Well, he's not the distributor. He represents our favorite distributor in the world, and he is our favorite now sales manager, because I believe he got a promotion recently. And I'll let you tell the folks at home a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about why you love these wines, and a little bit more, I don't know, fun fact about Don that I don't know.
Wow, that kind of gets back to our previous F-bomb conversation, I think. So, all right. So, hey, everyone, how are you? Good to see you again, of those of you that I can see. So welcome. I'm hopefully very soon we will be doing this a little bit more in person. But anyway, all right, so let's jump in. Drink your first wine. Go ahead. The Jean-Paul Brun Beaujolais Blanc. So we are here in France, kind of on the eastern side there at the very southern end. Technically, this would be part of Burgundy, although the last few years, last 10 or so, they've really worked very hard to kind of create their own identity away from Burgundy proper. Moving a little bit farther north of there, you really start getting into, what is arguably the greatest wine region on the planet. So there is a little bit of a few similarities. The first one being that the primary white grape that's going to be grown here is Chardonnay. So this is all Chardonnay again. Nice, good, clean, crisp. There's a little bit of creaminess there from a little bit of mallow, a little bit of malolactic fermentation. So basically, we're going to make this a little easy. So malolactic fermentation, I don't know that it's technically a fermentation, but basically what it is taking malic acid, so think green apple kind of tart, and turning that into lactic acid, which is the acid that would be in milk, yogurt. So it is giving you that nice creamy texture, which if you were to just leave the wine alone and just let it age, it would kind of go there naturally. I mean, what malolactic is doing is basically artificially, accelerating a process to get us to the result, because we don't want to wait, which is kind of what it is. We want to drink it right now. At least I want to drink it right now. So, so all steel. So let's talk a little bit about Jean-Paul Brun. So Jean-Paul Brun is kind of one of those guys that, if you want to be talking about natural wine, he's one of the, as you can see, more tenured members of that organization. And to put this a little bit more in context, Beaujolais, and to some ways Provence with the rosé, the Cabernet Franc for sure, coming from the Loire Valley in Touraine, and we'll talk about this more as we get there. I mean, you are dealing with, generally a little bit more honest, lowbrow kind of wines, right? Like, even though Beaujolais is part of Burgundy and literally, 30 miles north, you are in some of the most expensive land on the property. This is just good old fashioned, honest winemaking. Honestly, like all the dudes that are up working up there, this is what they drink at their house, right? Like, this is the everyday guys kind of wine. And when you're in that kind of environment, especially in France, which, I love France, but, let's just be honest, they're, you pretty much got to you got to toe the line, right? Like, you do things the way that they've been done, the way your father did it, the way your grandfather did it, yada, yada. So to take an area that is a little bit more quantity minded, as in, hey, let's just grow a lot of grapes, and to be in that environment and to say, all right, guys, listen, like, all of these chemicals that we're using, we're really not you get the only advantage it provides is, tonnage, more weight, more grapes, but those grapes are not as interesting, right? So what are we actually doing, especially in France, Europe, all over France and Italy, all that. But I think France they take the most pride in it being from where they come, to the point of, especially not too far from here, going a little bit farther north in Burgundy, where land, literally a hillside is going to be more revered than the next hillside. Having that sense of place there is nowhere that is going to be more important than in France, right? Like, my wines in this village are better because yada, yada, yada. Then literally, as you're standing in the vineyard looking at this other hill way over there, and the guy's like trashing that hill over there because it's not over here, right? Like, this is uber important to have that sense of place. And one of those things we do, let's go back to that next slide. We see natural yeast in steel. So, yeast population is very specific. Where I'm at, the yeast is not the same as where Adam is, as where Aaliyah is. And it's very important for natural, not only winemakers, but those of us who want to drink it, that you're using natural yeast, because that is going to add to the aroma, to the flavor, to the personality of the wine. And it's kind of interesting, or for those of us who have been doing this for a while, like 10, 15 years ago, we did not talk about yeast, right? The conversation of yeast was, hey, yeast is what turns sugar into alcohol, right? Like, what we have learned and information that's been disseminated on yeast in the last 10 years is like super duper cool, because as it turns out, it's like really, really important to how that wine that you're drinking is going to taste, and the experience that you're going to have with it. So malolactic, we talked the organic. So a little bit back to Jean-Paul Brun. So you're back in an area that's a little bit higher production. And this is the guy who's like, well, you know what? I'm going to stop using fertilizers, and I'm going to stop really using herbicides. I'm not going to, try to kill everything. I mean, for a very long time, one of the prevailing ideologies is that you want to eliminate anything that might possibly compete with the vine, right? And then what we actually learned later on is that there is so much interplay going on, not only above in what we see, but especially below the ground and what's happening underneath, and even what kind of animals and insects some of that ground cover is going to attract, and how that may help and benefit the vine. For those of us who love this, the lesson is that, how could we have ever been so arrogant to think that, we were going to do better than Mother Nature was going to do, right? Like, yes, you work with, and sometimes you might, coax or move something, but, to try to compete against, is just really not very smart. So anyway, any questions? We good?
We're going to put questions in the chat function for you, Don, and then Aaliyah will help proctor any questions. I've got one question for you.
Yeah.
How'd you get into wine?
Well, drinking, and waiting tables in college. I happened to, after I graduated high school up in Marietta, I farted around for a little bit. My dad lived right outside of New York City, and I went up there for a little while, ended up working someplace, just waiting tables and making some cash. That not only was the place like dripping in money, right? But the maitre d' was really in the process of building a wine program, and so was very eager to kind of teach and educate us. So this place I'm working, I mean, this is, first growth Bordeaux, Premier Grand Cru Burgundy, like the best of California, like the best of everywhere. And it's basically a private club, but it's a corporate club. So this is, Citibank, Merck, Goldman Sachs money. These guys come in and, rack up a couple $1,000s on wine, and they would look at me and be like, hey, kid, you just keep opening them until we tell you to stop opening them. And, they would be on coffee and I would just keep opening them, and at the end of the day, we'd have all this amazing wine open that would have been breathing for 3 hours, and then the maitre d', if he was in a good mood, would sit us up at the bar. And, I mean, I knew absolutely nothing. I went from, being a kid who, we debated what was better, old Milwaukee versus Milwaukee's best, to drinking this amazing Burgundy. Like, that's what I learned on, So it, in a way it was cool because I got to drink things that, I would never be able to afford, right, to buy for myself. But then, it also sucks because I don't like things that aren't great, because that's what I always thought wine was, right? This really amazing, wonderful thing. So, all right, you guys got rosé? Yeah, okay. All right, so this is cool. This is a little bit special. So this is a property close to Beaune. So we are in Provence. This is, I think it's, just Côtes de Provence appellation. So what's cool about this is the grape. And if you look on this, the picture in the bottom right, you see the word Tiburon. So that's actually the grape, all right? So if you are to go back, say 75, 80 years, Tiburon would have been the main grape, the main rosé grape of Provence. And if you look just to the left, you see how sandy that soil is there, right? So Tiburon excels when it is very close to the water, as this property is. Sandier soils can deal with a little bit more, likes the wind, the breeze. As Provence, and especially Provence rosé, ended up becoming a thing middle of the last century, Tiburon is a little bit more specific as far as where it likes to be, versus grapes like Cinsault and Grenache, which, really all they care about is heat, right? If it's hot, they'll grow. Sometimes you have to beat Grenache back down there, right? So it was easier, it was less expensive. So a lot of the Tiburon would have been torn up in favor of those varietals that were just much easier to grow, gave you higher production levels, are just more naturally resistant to things like fungus and, and all of these other things that, back to the conversation, about chemicals and things like that. Remember, that's, also a cost, that these are basically farmers. So for a family like this, the property's been in the family. So this is one of the last producers, not only that's using Tiburon. I mean, I don't think there maybe is 5 or 6 producers left that are not only using Tiburon, but making it primarily Tiburon. So the basic wine is going to be mostly Tiburon with a little bit of Grenache. And then what you're drinking, which is the Spécial de Vignette, this is going to be 100% Tiburon. Basically, they have never really ever used chemicals. I mean, that last picture, the dad, who is really just as charming and as wonderful as you can ask a human to be, just really very friendly, great, gracious man. He said, I think his grandfather at one point may have gone for like a 2 or 3 year period where he kind of, once again, hey, this is what everybody's doing. You're French, you do what we're supposed to be doing, and everybody's using them. And he kind of started to look into it, and, his instincts were like, this is not going to reap, my son benefits or, my grandchildren benefits, right? Like, I think that is when you look at pretty much everything we're drinking today, There is not an immediate, we're making wine today, right? Let's do everything we need to do just to worry about this vintage, and we'll worry about next vintage next year. When land has been in the family for generations, that becomes in a way the identity of that family, right? Like they're so tied to that almost in a way disrespecting and not thinking that, hey, my grandfather and great grandfather did what he had to do, so I can now support my family, and I need to make sure that I'm doing those things so that the generations that come after me will have it as well. All right, so now this is the super cool part. So typically, fermentation is yeast eats sugar, makes alcohol. So when there's no sugar left and the yeast finally dies, it sinks, right? It's at the bottom. We call it lees. There would be some times when you're making a white wine or a red wine that you would actually stir that up. It's called batonnage. It helps to add creaminess as well as a yeasty, bready kind of quality to wine. There is a unique, and I haven't done the research enough to say this with absolute certainty, but it is my observation that typically when you are very close to water or larger bodies of water, there is a specific yeast that's called flore, or in this case, fleurette is what the French would call it, that when that fermentation is over, it doesn't sink, it actually floats, right? So you see it here in Provence. You see it, it's basically how, a good part of sherry is made. So you see that in the very southern part of Spain, which is literally right on the water. What am I forgetting? Is it Marsala or Madeira? One of them, I think Marsala has.
Marsala.
Yeah, that also, and that's going to be on that northwestern corner of Sicily. So basically very close to the water. So I don't know of any other producer where this is the case, right? So there are these huge, beautiful 120-year-old Foudre, right? Like they're bigger than we are as a human. So probably I would say maybe 7-8 feet tall, right? They're not completely round. They're a little bit more kind of oval. Can I share screen? Hold on. Let me see if I can show you quickly. Nope. Okay. All right, no worries. So these huge, wonderful, beautiful, big oak barrels. So the wine goes in there, fermentation ends, the floor rises, so then it ages for a year under floor. So what you're having 2019, this is the current vintage. We just got this. So there's, two lessons. A, isn't it wonderful and cool and amazing? And lesson number 2 is, please put away the whole belief that you have to drink young rosé. That is absolutely positively not the case. I mean, and if you think about it, logically, that red wine ages better than white wine, but we do drink aged white wine. Why would we not drink aged rosé? Like, it makes no sense, right? It's illogical. So you can, I think, Chris, you were with me, right? You were with me when we were in Brunello, when we ended up drinking the Spanish rosé that was 28 years old, and it was absolutely glorious. So yeah, you can totally age it. And this, you can absolutely lay this down as well if you wanted to. So you get a little bit, and it's this is just not going to play as well on a Zoom tasting. You can almost, if anybody's familiar with sherry, especially dry sherry, Fino sherry, there is that kind of subtle little kind of sherry aroma-esque flavor to it that I love, but there's great weight, nice and round. I mean, you want to talk about, shrimp, like this is a shrimp's best friend.
Don, you can share your screen now.
All right, I think, yeah.
It's amazing. And,
So there they are. So that's some of them right there. Yeah, you can see how old, you can see where they've had to write that first one where they've had to repair it a little bit, where it started leaking a little bit. This is where we are in their cellar, you know. I mean, this stuff has been here. That would be a filter. That's how they kind of filter some of the wine. That's just kind of a little bar that they had kind of set up that after we were kind of out touring everything. So, you know, I mean, it's cool. It's tradition. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. I think it drinks really well. So how are we doing on time? Am I talking too much?
No, you're good, man.
Good?
We're right on time. You can never talk too much. And if we go
All
over a little bit, I don't think anybody's going to turn us off. Yeah, and 2018 is the current vintage on this, super limited. And I want to talk.
Oh,
just a little
sorry.
bit-
I'm sorry. You're right. You had the vignettes. I'm just drinking the regular. Sorry.
Yep.
You're right. Yeah, my bad.
No worries. As far as, you know, frustration for wine not being available for you to buy after our Zoom tastings, this is the guy that all your anger needs to go towards. Actually, not just him, his company. So those of you who are still waiting on the Lunar Apogee GSM and the what was the other one? Petroni, stuck in New York. His company. But I say that in a joking way to say that he has most of the wines that we want that a lot of times we can't get because it's such small production. It's not their fault. They focus on those. We focus on those. It's the nature of the beast when you support small families, and there's only enough wine produced each year based on the acreage that they have to farm. So they can't increase production to 20,000 cases to make sure that everybody gets the wine. And honestly, if they did, it wouldn't be what we want to drink anyways. So I just wanted to touch real quick on these two wines. The Jean Paul Brune, $25 a bottle, 100% Chardonnay. It comes and goes. We have it most of the year, but there are some gaps in when the next vintage is released. Don, how much of this wine is available right now in Georgia? And this is 43 for the rosé.
I mean, the Chardonnay just switched, right? Like we thought it was going to be 18, and when it showed up, it was 19, which is, you know, welcome to, you know, small family winemaking, right? They're like, hey, dude, you said Chardonnay, we sent Chardonnay. So, you know, the issue right now is just with it being direct import, right? So this importer doesn't keep any wine whatsoever here in the US, right? Like they represent the wines. They're the ones who, you know, deal with allocations, marketing, blah, 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 but they don't keep any wine here, right? Like, even though they represent the wine and they're taking a cut, we basically send our invoices directly to the winery. So, I mean, you guys know all the global shipping challenges. I mean, we're good for a little bit, you know, I mean, we've already ordered more, right? Like that's already, I don't think it's left France yet, but I think it's making its way to the port. So, you know.
What about the rosé?
The rosé were good. I mean, I got like another 3 cases kind of stashed away of the vignette. And I think, you know, this would be a situation where, you know, and I'm not saying this in any kind of cheeky way, but, you know, where COVID kind of helps, right? Because normally the vignette, we get what we get. And then that's it, right? Like restaurant, that is a very restaurant wine, right? Like restaurants are going to sell more rosé of that caliber than retail will. And with restaurants not buying, it's there, right? You know, I mean, I was able to, you know, typically in the past, that vignette, the little bit that we got, I sold every bottle to one customer, right? He bought it for years, blah, blah, blah. It came in, it went out. Like I would tell him, hey, it's here. And he'd be like, send it tomorrow, you know, and then that would be it. But so drink it up while you can. The regular, we're good on. And there is they actually do another rosé called Temptations, which is their very base Coast of Provence, but it's Cinsault and Carignan and Grenache. And, you know, I mean, I love those and I'm not in any way disparaging them, but there are a million of them out there. And, you know, I would rather, let's talk about something a little bit more special. So.
Heard.
All right. Everybody
All right. Love it. Let's get to some red wines.
All right, so we're doing Combe la Serre. All right, so this is one of my favorite wines, period, right? Like, I'm not lying when I tell you this wine. I mean, I've been drinking this wine for, I don't know, maybe not 10 vintages, but probably a good 7 to 8 vintages. And I have never not sold it, right? When I was in retail and I was, doing what Adam did, or is doing, excuse me, to now, like, I just love this wine. So Combelisor, so we're southwestern France. We are in what the French would say is Cahors, right? We would not pronounce the H. And the grape down here is Malbec. So Malbec is another one of the French grapes. We would consider it one of the Bordeaux varietals. If you look straight up top there, Cab and Merlot would be the dominant players, and then Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Carmenere, and Malbec. Malbec is not used a whole lot, although, this is also what's kind of interesting is, you look at Bordeaux, which, and this is what's, interesting about France, right? Like, we're all going to take our little, swipes at the French, and I'm not going to say they don't deserve it, but, this is truly still the foundation of wine, right? Like, if you really want to know about wine and you really want to get into drinking really good, great wine, you have to know France. Like, France is, it's like, well, I'm sure I'm not going to say something that I'm not experiencing, but, France is the foundation that you have to build off of. And even to the point of how wines are labeled, right? Like, you master France, like everything else will fall into place. So anyway, so you look at Bordeaux there, right? Like, literally since like the middle 1600s, Bordeaux has been one of the wines that everybody on the planet like absolutely wants, right? So you go back 20 years, nobody in Bordeaux was doing Malbec, right? Like, nobody cared because it was not considered a really great quality, right? You would see it farther north up in the Loire Valley. You see it grown there, and most of the wine in the Loire Valley, I mean, especially going back a couple decades, was just thought of as very village. It was, and I'm not saying this in any kind of way, but it was basically like blue collar wine, right? And Southwest as well, right? And so Malbec, was a little bit kind of, like the Bordeaux, the Bordelais would like look down their nose at it a little bit, like Malbec, like it's not regal enough, right? And then once Malbec started getting, like, there's more producers in Bordeaux putting Malbec in their blend now than there ever were, right? Because everybody loves Malbec, right? Thank you, Argentina, right? Like they were the ones who took a French grape and said, hey, it actually is kind of delicious. So Malbec, the French will call it Cot, C-O-T. And if you guys have the bottle, if you look on the bottle, it actually says it on the back. It says Malbec, and then it says Cot, and then it says Auxerrois, Auxerrois. So that is what locally, like literally in his little village, that's what they call this very specific cultivar of Malbec, right, is Auxerrois. And that's kind of, like, I don't know, I've never seen that before in any other bottle, but that is kind of his tip of the cap to tradition, right? That even though it's southwestern France, and I know in Alpharetta, Georgia, plenty of you guys have been, driving down in this part of France, it can be a little bit sparse. It can be, a little bit, not a whole lot of big money. These are just good, honest, farmers, good, honest wine. But this thing delivers every single vintage, every single bottle. It is so good. It's all Malbec. So in Cahors, it would be uncommon to have 100% Malbec. You would blend in some of the other varietals that traditionally would have been thought of as being more prestigious, i.e. Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot especially. You will see Cabernet Franc used down here. I've seen Syrah down here. So to go with just 100% Malbec, once again, that is his, homage to, hey, this is a great grape, and, we can make great wines down here. They are certified organic. This is the pure fruit. So all cement, okay? He does some higher end stuff that sees some barrel, and Adam, you will be very happy to know that he also does a white wine, a Vermintino, which we just ordered like 5 or 6 cases of. So you guys,
same region,
huh?
In the same region?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Wow.
because you know Vermintino, like a little bit farther east, it's Rolle,
Yeah.
Rolle. So I'm not sure what he calls it here, but I mean, you know, I mean, there's Vermentino in Spain, right? Like
Yeah.
Germans took it, you know, there's Malvasia all over Spain. We just never knew it because they weren't calling it Malvasia, you know. But anyway, yeah, so that's going to be super cool. And we did order some of the stuff that sees a little bit of oak as well. So, you know, I mean, honestly, I just don't know what else you want for this price, you know. I mean, good, it's honest, organic, minimal sulfur. If he's going to use it, he's only going to use it at bottling, but he would prefer not to use it at all. You know, like I totally, like we're going here one day, like for sure. Like I promise you, we are going to have one of the best meals we've ever had.
Amen.
Yeah.
And while Don's taking a sip, $22 a bottle for this Malbec. It is pure Malbec. It is delicious. It is beautiful. Just hit the shop about a month ago. We featured in our Easter packs, and it is just dynamite. This should please all of those GSM fans as well. The Lunar Apogee Lyrac. It's different because it's a different grape, it's a different region, but it has that dark, that violet, that kind of really graphite, complex, just beautiful balance. And I mean, for the money, I think this beats just about any bottle of wine that we have on the shelf right now. And I definitely want the Vermentino, and I definitely want the oak version of the Malbec as well. And I also want to plug, I know we're going to talk about it a little bit at the end of the tasting, but I'm gonna do a little teaser so you can think about it while we're finishing the last wine. We're planning our second trip. We never got to take the first trip, Sicily, because it was COVID, and we planned that trip with Mr. Don Hackett, and we're planning another trip in the fall to Oregon. We're going to keep it domestic. We're going to keep it a little bit more accessible. It is going to be led by Don, sponsored by Fermented. Well, I don't know if sponsored is the right
I mean,
word.
whatever, who cares? Like, I don't care about that.
And if you love Don, you should come to Oregon with us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the tasting. Sorry.
No, don't be. All right, so let's just take a brief second and we'll get a little bit more wine geeky. So the second point there, pressed with 10 to 20% whole cluster. So basically whole cluster is putting in some of the woody part, you know, the stems. So traditionally, very honest winemaking like this would be very whole cluster, right? You would pull the whole, you know, cut the grape, throw it in whatever it was going to go in. A lot of just the pressure of throwing more grapes on top of grapes would break skins. And as long as you weren't using a bunch of copper and sulfur in the vineyards, then your grapes were going to have this wonderful, beautiful yeast all over the skins. And you would have fermentation just begin naturally. And then once it was going, you know, you're off to the races. So when you go back to like mid to 880s, kind of going into the early 90s, really you can see some consistencies with the rise of especially wine journals and wine journalism, you know, where we will say a more diversified interpretation was discouraged, you know. Things started to become a little bit more focused on fruit, right? And we're talking about, a sorting table and everything is hand sorted. And basically what they were doing is they were pulling out clusters that maybe perhaps there could have been a little bit of rot, or, you know, a good 20-30% of the backside of the cluster never saw any sun, so it wasn't ripe, whatever. But a lot of what they were doing too was destemming, right? Pulling the grapes off of the stem so you didn't get any of that woody, or in some cases it can come off as a little bit of a green element, like a, bell peppery kind of quality. And as we started, early 2000s and, really more the last 15 years or so, 10 years especially, you're seeing people going back to what was the more traditional way of making wine, and that is going to include more whole cluster. So 10 to 20% on this wine, because this is the base, right? It's not seeing any wood, it's all cement. This is his softer, little more fruit, little jammy. This is the one that, when things get out of hand, you end up drinking 3 bottles with your friends one night kind of wine, right? So he wants to add a little bit, because that's going to add complexity, a little bit more aroma, a little bit more flavor. It's also adding some textural and some more tannin elements. Remember, because the tannin is in the skin, it's in the pits, and then it's in the woody part of the plant, right? It's not in the fleshy fruit or the juice. So you're getting a little bit more tannin in there as well. So, all right. I hope you guys love that one, because that is delish.
Yeah, it really is.
And pay attention to the texture on that as well, right? Like, part of what alcohol does is alcohol is weight. So, being down southwestern France, once again, I know a lot of you have been there. It can get pretty hot, you know what I'm saying? So you may end up getting a little bit more alcohol than when you ferment, or a little more sugar. When you ferment all of that sugar out, you're going to have a little bit more alcohol. So I think as your palate evolves, you will notice that a little bit more, especially when you start pairing with food. A lot of times, you can pair, like sometimes you would pair on aroma, sometimes you would pair on flavor, sometimes you would just pair on because they both come from the same place. And then you actually can, and I have found just oddly enough, last night I'm kind of watching old Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations, and it was the one on El Bulli. He was there like 2 weeks before they closed it, and they did kind of a little thing talking about how, Adrien Ferrand was such a master of texture, right? Of playing with how things actually kind of feel in your mouth. All right, so thank you, Adam, for my lovely fermented bottle.
You're welcome, Don.
Cabernet Franc. I'm just letting you guys know that, there was 3 cases we got. One of those cases went to South Carolina, and Adam got 1 whole case. So that makes up for the Lyrac.
And I think we're down to like 3 bottles, just FYI already.
Of this, yeah.
Yeah, it always goes super quick, but we wanted to feature it because it is super special and super delicious.
Well, but things are going to get better for this, right?
Yeah.
So here's just kind of just little like industry sidebar. So this importer, so there used to be, so back when, natural wine really, really started, was still not really a whole lot of people were on board. And there was really, the little bit that was coming in was never leaving New York, right? And if it did, it made it to like Baltimore or Boston or, and there was a couple really cool natural wine bars in New York. And then there was one in Brooklyn. And the guy who was, kind of like the bartender at this one in Brooklyn, just in the course of a couple years of him just loving these wines and wanting to sell these wines and going to France a couple times, and like, you meet up with the dude who's on, the screen there, and he's like, oh my God, I've got a buddy down the street, you got to try this. And then you go down there one afternoon and you end up spending 3 hours down there, and you're like, holy shit, send some of that, I'll take 50 cases. So he started this import company, right? Doing these really cool, interesting wines, like with dudes who are just like, look at that picture in the bottom right? Like that is nothing. That is, all right, do what you're going to do. I'm going to come back in a few weeks and I'm going to take all the grapes, right? And I'm going to make some wine, and then I'll see you next year kind of thing, like obviously I'm exaggerating, but still, that is like, that's kind of beautiful. So anyway, so this guy starts this import company, and then much to his dismay, finds out that we are in the wine business, right? And there's like emails you got to answer, and You got to figure out how to get the wine from that dude who's out in the middle of nowhere, who doesn't know anything about anything but other than wine. And like, I think I know what a van is. I'll see if I can find one and you guys can come pick up the wine. So anyway, he basically, I think, has like gone back to bartending or something, right? So for a while, we couldn't get the wine. For all of last year, we got nothing, right? So another guy has come in, bought the wine, and we are, you will see 4 to 5 times as much wine this year from these guys, not specifically La Grande Belle, but from the importer. And there's actually there's some new stuff coming. We need to get that Riesling from Luxembourg that Fifi brought in. These guys would go crazy for that. All right, so La Grande Belle. All right, so we are up in the Loire Valley, right? So really let's just be honest, part of why the Loire Valley is there is because it is the closest wine region to Paris, right? That has an incredible amount of diversity. If you were to look at the Loire Valley, we kind of break it up into 4 little parts. You've got Nantes all the way to the left. That second kind of section in there is going to be Anjou. You see kind of right above the arrow, the village, well, not a village, it's actually kind of a city of Tours. And then moving all the way over to the right, you have where kind of Sancerre comes from. So we're in Anjou, that second little section there. And this is very traditionally a pump it out factory kind of farming, like, trust me, dude, Paris will drink as much as you can possibly make kind of place, right? But once again, what's super cool about an area like this is the diversity, right? I mean, because you've got everything here. You've got Pinot, you've got Cabernet, you've got Côte or Malbec, you've got Sauvignon Blanc, you've got Muscadet. Not everything. Well, actually, I'm going to just go ahead and say this. Well, no, Cabernet Franc really is amazing from here, but there's a lot of things grown here that get to the point of being very good, but not great, right? Like Pinot Noir can get to the point that it's very good, but if you want great, you got to go to Burgundy, right? I think Gamay too can get to the point that it's really good, but it's never great, right? Like Cabernet Franc can be great, Sauvignon Blanc can be great, but a lot of the other things, and then there's just stuff that like Grolleau, Grolleau, which if you were to just have a bottle that just said Anjou Rosé, it's mostly Grolleau, right? And for a very long time, once again, it was, people look down their nose at it. These guys here, they actually make one, right? Because they're like, it's okay to just be, honest and unsophisticated, right? Like there are times we need Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne. And then there are times we want to be in shorts and flip-flops, that's actually my dream is 3-star Michelin in shorts and flip-flops. Yes. One day that is my bucket list. Honestly.
I'll be there with you, Don.
Yeah. All right. So this is basically all Cabernet Franc. So what's interesting about what these guys are doing with wine too is really kind of looking at very traditional ways of how to make wine, right? Like super long macerations and dealing with, these like those big, beautiful oak barrels that we were looking at on the rosé. That's money, right? And when you're just kind of like a simple farmer, and remember that, you go back even just 50, 60 years, this whole idea that, I grow soybeans and then I grow cotton and then I grow peanuts. And like, that's not how, like you were doing everything, right? Because in addition to selling, you were also feeding yourself and your family and things like that. And things were done much more simply, right? Like all of your money didn't go to grapes, right? You were growing grapes, but you were also growing lettuce and you were growing or whatever, and you had cattle, right? So you would have milk and you were probably raising chickens and pigs. And as we found, all of that biodiversity really fed off of each other. So anyway, good, simple. This is just delicious. This is once again one of my favorite producers, but unfortunately we just don't see it nearly as much. But that's all right. We'll find something else.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. This is the first time I'm tasting it as well. This is everything that Cab Franc can be from 53-year-old vines. There's no green, there's no bell pepper. It's just pure fruit, complexity, depth, character, and you can't imitate wines like this. It comes from those vines that were planted in 1953. It comes from the organic viticulture. It comes from nature doing what nature intended to do with grapes, which was make it into wine without any human intervention.
Right.
Damn.
All right.
You didn't need to promise not to drop the F-bomb because we're just going to drop all the other ones.
Yep.
Did I drop one today?
No, you didn't. No,
I'm just good.
I just did.
So the other thing too is like, this is bottled without any additional sulfur, right? And this kind of goes back to, I can't remember who I was having this conversation with, but we were talking about how, wine it's just different today than it was even just a few years ago. A lot of the same rules don't apply anymore. Your phone, the internet, social media, what that has done from a marketing standpoint. And, someone was talking about how, wine's always changing and blah, blah, blah. And my response was, yeah, except for the fact that Burgundy's been the best wine on the planet for the last 1,000 years, and it still is, and it will, still be. There's something to be said a little bit about, that tradition, right? And I am all for innovation, and I am all for, while I understand the need to say that you have to grow certain grapes in certain regions, and we want to make sure the customer knows what they're getting when they buy a bottle of Burgundy. I mean, there's a lot to be said for scrapping the rules, right? And just going off of, well, I think this just tastes really, really amazing. And I think there's a spot for both of those camps, right? Like these guys who want to do something so traditional and old school, dealing with much shorter macerations. Part of the equation is, this whole idea that you leave the juice on the skins for like a month or 6 weeks. Like back in the day, if you were running like a multicultural farm, you'd be like, yeah, we don't got time for that. Like it needs to ferment for a couple of days, and we're putting it in something, and then, we're going to go harvest cucumbers or whatever else it was, So, yeah, yummy. All right. Yummy. So you want to do a few questions? Why we got?
Yeah, we're gonna figure out what people's favorites were. We did have one question for somebody who has a bottle in front of them. What is the alcohol content on the 53? I'm gonna guess 13 and a half, but somebody who has a bottle, confirm that for us, and then we'll tell you why you can't believe labels anyways for alcohol content. But before we get into that, think about what your favorite is. Think about what your favorite is. Put it into the chat function. We're going to figure out 13%. Alex, thank you very much for that. So alcohol content can have a legal leeway of 1.5% either way. So it could say 13, but it can actually be 14.5, or it can actually be 11.5. So you can't believe alcohol levels, unfortunately, but most of the natural producers and the smaller producers tend to be a little bit closer to what is true. The reason people fudge alcohol levels is because there's different taxation levels at different alcohol percentages. And so it's this loophole that producers are allotted to keep their wines under a certain tax threshold if they want to. And it also enables them to keep the label pretty much the same every year. If you just put 14% every year and you're within a 1.5 variance of that 14%, you never have to change that part of your label. And so I would say that this is pretty close to being spot on at 13% alcohol. The Malbec was 12.5% alcohol, stated on the label. And so definitely lower, definitely no additives, definitely natural, every single one of these. And these are wines that you can drink and not feel terrible the next day, you know?
Adam, question about that. If
Yes.
legally for the labels, it can deviate by 1.5. If it is on a technical sheet with the tech details of how the wine was made, does that same 1.5 will apply?
There's no legal definition to that whatsoever. So they can
Oh.
put whatever they want on a tech sheet, and you have to be legal for labels for the TA or for the Tobacco and Alcohol Bureau. So they're going to come after you if you're off too much on the labels. But as far as a tech sheet, yeah, I would say those are probably going to be pretty accurate of what the alcohol level is. But I don't know. That's a great question.
I mean, it really depends. I mean, if the importer is doing the tech sheet, then it's going to say exactly what the label says, right?
Yep.
Like there are some instances in the past where we have really been looking for some technical data that we have been able to source the actual lab results on a wine. You know, we just happen, you know, it's a, you know, like the Combel Le Sur would be the perfect example, right? Like if we emailed the winery, that dude would be the guy who gets the email, right? And he'd be like, okay, well, you know, I've got the sheet, you know, because everything has to go through a lab, you know, make sure there are no unhealthy compounds, whatever, yada, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, and the other part of that is a lot of times those labels may be printed before the wine's done being made, right? Like you've got to allow a little bit of a leeway because, you know, something might happen that the alcohol ends up not being exactly, you know, what you think it's going to be. And then there's also the Italians, right, who are ethnically predisposed to cheating, right? So they don't ever like to, you know.
And we'll ask Eric about that next week.
You're like, what's the alcohol? And they go, yeah, there's alcohol.
Don, are you from Italy?
I have family. No, we would say we are not from Italy. We're from Sicily.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
Actually, I knew that already. All right, Leah, do you have a tabulation for our votes?
I do. I just need your and Don's favorites.
Son of a bitch! I knew you were gonna.
Yeah.
You might ask.
I know.
I mean, I got to go with number 4 just because I know that's the only taste of it I'm going to have.
Oh man, it's tough. And Steven, I got your back, man. I dropped 3 of them on this tasting for you. Let's see.
Wait, you mean like you dropped him on the floor?
No, I dropped 3 different curse words on the tasting.
Oh, okay. I thought you were
trying
saying
to
you were
help
dropping
out Mr.
bottles.
Steven, no, I haven't dropped anything today.
You know, Adam, that might be your $1 million ideas. We need some kind of like plug-in app for Zoom that filters all the curse words out, you know, like they do at the Grammys when Guns N' Roses are up there.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. All right.
Yeah,
Can't make up my mind. I have to go with 53 as well. It's so freaking delicious. And again, only 2 bottles. So if you want them, claim them now.
Okay. Well,
Or Adam's going to drink them.
Or Adam's going to take them home.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, we
3-1.
I had to defer back to my sheet. The Malbec wins today,
Nice.
number 3,
That's
and
awesome.
but wins by 1 point over the Jean Paul Brun Chardonnay.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool.
Boom.
Love it.
How'd the rosé do?
I was the only one who voted for the rosé, so it's mine. It's all mine.
Well, I was honestly battling between the rosé and the 53 for my personal favorites. But man,
well, you said yours. So
If we had only done white wines, I bet you or whites and rosés, I bet you the rosé would have won.
yeah.
But
Or-
after the
yeah,
rosé
yeah.
to do that Cahors, that would, or maybe not.
Any questions for Mr. Don, Aaliyah?
no current questions I observe in the chat.
All right,
All right.
Don, why don't you take a second to tell us about what we're going to be trying to plan for August?
All right. So I think we are tentatively looking at like that second week of August. Where is it? Yeah, so we're looking like 11, 12, 13, right? So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So we'll go to Oregon. We're going to do, I think, I don't know. I will have more answers on Monday because Adam and I have set a date of, the end of this month for being able to say we're doing this or not doing it and having the ideas. So I've already talked to some winemakers and they seem to think that, we're good to come out there at that time, that, they're already planning on opening up, in like May and June in most cases. So by the time we get there in August, now, obviously, we can't go too late. Because literally right around that time is literally going to be where harvest could start, right? Depending on what happens. I mean, we're still so early in the process, roughly, I'd have to look, and this is kind of an interesting trivia if the number has changed, but traditionally you say 110 days from when the bud first starts to flower until you should start harvesting fruit, right? Like obviously, once again, plan as you may, Mother Nature will tell you what's going to happen, but that's roughly the number you use, about 110 days. So we can't go too much later. So yeah, we're gonna be in Willamette. You can traditionally, we plan on roughly about 2 visits a day. It's not going to be, crazy, death march. We're only doing 3 days, so I might push it on 1 day. And I want to show you as much of it as I can, right? Like we recently brought in a new producer from Willamette that's kind of doing things a little differently and not so focusing on Burgundy, i.e. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but looking more at some Loire. And as I was reading, and part of their marketing shtick is, back before, all of the French from Burgundy arrived and, started opening, some of the, quite a few of the top Oregon Pinot producers are actually producers from Burgundy, right? Like they were the first ones to say, yep, you're right. Pinot grows damn good in Burgundy. And here we come with all of our money, right? And we're going to start making wine there. But it was actually very agricultural, blue collar, like it wasn't, quite so, elegant as it is today. And this guy is kind of taking that approach. And there's actually a lot more diversity going on up there than we actually even realized, right? Like there's an incredible amount of different grapes being grown. And what's interesting is we're at this point where we're really getting like, it's like Oregon 2.0, right? Or maybe 3.0. Like we've learned some stuff, but now we're really starting to say, wow, look at all of the things that will work here, right? Like, just to give you a little bit of analogy, you look at Napa versus Sonoma. Like Sonoma is like exponentially more diverse than Napa is, right? Like over 600 varietals grown there. They have more in just Sonoma County, more soil and subsoil variation than the entire country of France, right? Like Oregon, we just say Willamette and we just think what's really like this area when it's really like this, right? And at the top is where your Pinot and your Chard are working, but you start going down, we're seeing killer Malbec, killer Tempranillo come out of, I'm having some of the best, some of what I am finding to be some of the most exciting Cabernet is coming out of Oregon right now, So yes, we're going to pay homage, and Adam was adamant about going. Where do you want to go, Irie? Yeah, which is like the first, winery in Oregon, and we're going to go there. We're going to see if we can't. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to see if I can get us into what is the last original block of vines that he would have planted when he went up there. yeah, we're going to do some cool stuff and we're going to eat. And I'm not going to lie, but you can ask Chris, you're going to have the time of your life. And then that's going to be a precursor till next year.
Yep.
We're going to Europe next year, at least 2 trips.
Amen. Yeah. Don and I have been talking about this for a long time. We want to do 2 trips a year. Don used to take groups over all the time. So he never mentioned it, but he ran a store for Sherlock's for a long time in the retail business and took groups over to different regions, to different wine areas. And so he has a lot of experience taking groups over. You'll be in great hands. Chris has gone to several trips with him, and he has a long list of devoted clients and friends who travel abroad to different wine regions with Don. And so just know that when we announce these trips, Don is going to be planning them, leading them. I'll be there as well. But I'll just be there for fun more than anything. I'm going to let handle all of the heavy work.
Right. So if you find yourself at 11:30 needing ice, call Don.
No, I can get ice. I'm still in the service industry, even though it's a wine shop. I still want to help people.
Although I will tell you that 2 weekends ago, I did, was hanging out with like people that have been on these trips are now friends, right? Like Chris was a customer, right? And now he's like one of my best friends, right? And we have a lot of amazing stories because, there's the official trip and then there's the unofficial, what happens before and after, where, that's where it really ensues. And the last thing I will say is, this whole thing is like 15 people. There will be 12 of y'all, and then Adam, myself, and I'm assuming Mrs. Adam is going to be there as well.
We'll see how Ezra is doing. Mrs. Adam may not be able to get away for that trip.
All right. Then it'll be 14, but she'll be going to Europe next year.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is small stuff because a lot of times, like it's not just a visit, right? Like I try to plan meals at some of these wineries and we sit down and, a lot of times it's at dinner that's where you get the great wine, right? They're like, all right, well, let's pull out, something from 30 years ago, right? That's the magical part, right? That, we're able to provide that people who are just in the wine travel business can't provide. Like I'm not in the wine travel business, I'm in the wine business, right? I deal with some of the most iconic producers on the planet. And, sometimes just getting in the door is a huge coup. So yeah, we'll let you know soon, but we're, next year is going to be a huge year. We're going to have a lot of fun next year.
Hey, we're going to have a lot of fun this year.
Yeah, this year too.
And we're definitely going to have a lot of fun next year, but we're going to have a lot of fun this year as well. Oregon is, I think, the best domestic wine region to visit over Napa, over Sonoma, over any of those places. So stay tuned. Chris is shrugging his shoulders there. But that is all we've got for you. If you don't have any more questions, we ran a little over, but that's okay. We love hanging out with Don. We love drinking.
If you guys want to see some cool pictures, so Burgundy, which we were talking about with the Jean Paul Brun earlier this week and late last week, they were dealing with frost, which is a big problem, right? Because the buds have already flowered. And now if frost comes in and kills those, then you don't get a cluster. So what they do is like every 20 feet or so, they have a little metal pail that they start a fire, right? And go look at some of those pictures because you'll see an entire hillside with 1,000 little pails of fire where they're trying to keep the vines and the flowers from freezing and falling off. It's, it's worrisome, but at the same time, it's like, kind of beautiful at the same time. So go check that out. All right.
Love it.
Guys.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah, appreciate it.
We thank you all for another amazing tasting. Thank you for your support. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for drinking wine with us. Thanks for allowing us to be a part of your wine journey. And hopefully
next week is
Oh,
Eric Brown of
thank you.
Seleccio Natural.
Yes, next week is Eric Brown from Seleccio Natural. We've got some
Good
amazing
luck
natural
keeping that
Italian
under
wines.
an hour.
It's
You know, I'm pretty good at corralling Eric.
Are you the Eric Whisperer?
I'm the Eric Whisperer.
We may need you. We may need your help.
And then after
that's
that,
Italy.
Huh?
Oh, I was telling everybody that's Italy. So we're doing Italian wines next week.
yes,
All right.
all Italy. And then after that, we've got Chris Barnes. Or no, after that, we're going to do a natural wine tasting that I'm hosting, kind of a natural 101 kind of thing. We'll talk about the basics of natural wine. And then we've got Chris Barnes from Jose Pastor, Latin wine producer, importer, that's going to be on a Zoom with us. After that, we've got a wine specialist from Empire, Bobby Labertino, Miss Lauren Labertino's husband, and then some more fun winemaker and special guest Zooms after that. So it's going to be a fun-filled summer, and then we're going to go to Willamette Valley, and we're always going to drink great wine. So thank you. We love you. Have an awesome night. Happy Wednesday. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And ta-ta for now. I don't know where that came from, but Winnie the Pooh reference there. I think I was watching that the other
We
day.
got everyone drink your wine. Good night. We love
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.